Like I said last week, I'm just kind of following this thing week by week, and I want to continue to talk about the cross. Last week we were in John 3 and looking at Jesus talking about the cross, what appears to be the first time he talked about the cross, and not the one that, pick up your cross and follow me kind of thing, but the cross that he was going to be bearing. And he was in that conversation with Nicodemus. Very quickly, the conversation, if I had to kind of, in a nutshell, package it if you would, the conversation that he's having with Nicodemus that he had that preceded the cross, there was a lot of conversation about spiritual darkness and being blind. Unless you're born from above, you can't see the kingdom. Light shines in the darkness. There was a lot about spiritual darkness, blindness, that whole thing. The external emphasis that is not helpful in coming to a spiritual awakening, because it's just signs. And that's what Nicodemus said, that's where they were at. We've seen the signs, but they didn't know, they couldn't read the signs. They didn't know what the signs meant. Well, all they saw were the signs. And we said that Nicodemus really kind of represents the spiritual state of man, being blind, being very concerned about the external, not being able to get beyond blood and water, if you would, not being able to get beyond. Jesus is talking about being born from above. He hears him say being born again, and refers to going back in the womb or something. So it's a very, very clear conversation between the two of them. I don't know how you react when I use the word dualism. But it's very obviously, it's a dualistic conversation. Dualism meaning, right, wrong, evil, good, spiritual, natural, external, internal. Those are all like dualisms. They're all kind of like opposites, if you would. And it's very clear in the conversation that Nicodemus is stuck in the natural world, so to speak, that the Pharisees were. And Jesus is trying to, like we said, he's like the ladder that he talked about in John 1, where he's descended to take the hand of a blind man who thinks he sees. That's the thing about the Pharisees. They think they've got it all sussed, that they know exactly what's going on. Jesus knows they're spiritually blind, spiritually dead, the whole thing. And he's trying to help Nicodemus through that. So that was all that was surrounding our kind of conversation last week until we actually got to the cross. The two things in John 3 that I want to kind of carry with us is that when Jesus refers to the cross, there's two things that he is really punctuating that I hope came across last week. And one is the distorted, twisted understanding that man, particularly religious leaders, had about God and how he views us. In other words, he brings in the cross, followed by, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. If we run in a place of listen, this is what the Bible says. You screw up, you're toast. Okay? We all got that. You understand that? If you break the law, you're done. And Jesus is coming in and saying, I get that. I understand the judgment of man, and that's the way we treat each other. And that's the way you're going to treat me. You're going to put me on a cross. And I'm going to be innocent. But actually, that's not what God does. His judgment isn't condemnation and crucifixion. That's not his idea. In fact, Jesus said several times, I would have mercy, but you'll have sacrifice, which is a nice way of saying, I would love to just come here and wrap my arms around all of you and tell you I forgive you. But somebody's got to pay the price. You can't receive that, can you? It doesn't work that way. Somebody's got to pay the price. You're intent on sacrifice, so there will be one. This will kind of change the way you might think a little bit, theologically, about the whole plan of salvation, quite frankly. that what we've got is what we earned and then what we put into effect when it comes to the cross. When you see him on the cross, that is man's decision. That's man's judgment. He's got to go. And Jesus is saying, okay, I will. Because see, my judgment is love. I'm not going to fight you on this. And I'll lay down my life. Remember the nature of Jesus' death, which I didn't say last week? He laid down his life. The reason why we die is because of sin. If you don't have any sin, you don't really have to die. You with me on that? When he says, I laid down my life, that's a really nice way of saying, I haven't sinned. Sin can't take me. Sin and death can't take me. But I'm going to give myself over to it so that you don't have to. It's when you get to the cross and his death, the reason why I said I wanted to start the series, there's a series in my heart that is not about doctrine and it's not about theology. I think there are things about the cross that have kind of gotten overlooked to build good doctrines and good theologies. We said at the end of the meeting last week, I used the word mystery on Sunday morning. And Stephen said to me, it's a mystery. And it is. As much as we can continue to talk about this and we kind of absorb it in our hearts and minds, it still is like, wow, it's very mysterious. So, one of the two things that Jesus is trying to get Nicodemus to see, the cross is going to reveal God's love for us. I did not come to condemn the world. He didn't send me to condemn you guys. He came here to save you. You need to understand the nature of God is love. That's why John is all over God is love all the time. God is love. If we just got that, he really, really loves you. So he's trying to bring this message of the cross is a message of man's judgment, God's judgment. Man wants a sacrifice. God wants to reveal his love. Even after we crucify his son, he says, I love you.
You said this is written in John 3, right?
Yeah, I'm just kind of...
No, I know. I'm just kind of
I'm pontificating
reading.
here.
I'm just reading and listening.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I was...
That's in John 3. And the second thing, when he refers to Numbers 21, it does become interesting when he refers to that situation in the wilderness. That's the cross statement, that as they lifted up the serpent, Moses lifted up the serpent, so you shall lift up the Son of Man, so that you'll know God's love. But he's also referring back to Numbers 21, something that Nicodemus can't understand. Nicodemus is lost. You got to feel for the brother. When you read through the first 13 verses, I think 3 of his statements are, how can these things be? What are you talking about? Hello? You could see him just jockeying for position, and he's so unprepared because Jesus is talking spiritually, and he's trying to can the thing. He's just not getting it. So Jesus throws this thing out that's absolutely true. Nick, do you remember Numbers 21? What happened in the wilderness? The serpent, how the words that they spoke against each other? You could almost feel Jesus prophesying this to him. I'm going to be giving great lessons the next 3 years that you could take, and it could be your health and your wholeness. The Word of God is health and wholeness to you. But instead, you guys are going to backbite me and the people, everything else. And so eventually there is going to have to be the Son of Man lifted up on a pole. But if you look like they did in the wilderness, if you're willing to look at it for what it is, then you'll be healed. You'll believe and you'll be healed. So these are the things that were going on last week in John 3 that I think at the heart of it all is sort of like the word truth. Jesus is going to tell everybody the truth. He's not going to play games with people. And it was Francis Frangipan that said years ago that Jesus was, full of grace and truth, because the truth sometimes hurts. In fact, a lot of times hurts. But he would administer it with grace. So the sword, when it went in, was a bit painful, but he also supplied the grace to be able to handle it. Which is, I like that way of looking at it. That Jesus wants Nick to know the truth about God and about the crucifixion that's coming. This is very early on in his ministry. So for him to be talking to Nick at night kind of thing, for him to be talking to Nick and letting him know we're just at the, we're getting out of the, what do they call that, the opening gate there. We're just getting into the race. But I'm telling you at the finish line what it's going to look like. I'm the one that's going to be crucified. Just letting you know.
Did they get that?
Did he?
Did they understand what he was?
I don't personally think that anybody around Jesus, for the most part, got most of what he was talking about and doing, personally. But I don't know. I know John makes statements. John is the one of the four gospel writers who at times says, Jesus was doing and saying this, but we didn't get it. He says it about Palm Sunday. We were doing all these different things, but we didn't get it at all until he was resurrected. He says it at least 3 or 4, maybe 5 times. We didn't get it. So that's part of that for me is like, if this is John saying that, and John's not getting it, and John's got his ear to the heart of Jesus, and he's not getting it, I mean, we know Peter didn't get it. There's different things that people that we see, and it's hard to really say. I think Nicodemus, personally, the words that Jesus spoke that night got into him. And he did like Mary did. Remember it says about Mary that she didn't understand what was going on, but she retained these things in her heart and she pondered them. In other words, she didn't blow it off like, well, I don't get that, so I blow it off. No, she held on to it in her heart. And I think Nick did the same thing, because later on at the other end of his ministry, when the Pharisees are intent on apprehending him, they don't say crucify him, but they're going to get rid of him somehow. And they're intent on doing that. And Nicodemus is the one who speaks up and says, yeah, but does our law judge a man before they hear and see what he's doing? That's not a Pharisee statement. That is someone who has been impacted by the love of God and says, wait a minute. So is this the way we do things? We actually manipulate and distort the law to serve our purposes instead of learning how to love God more and each other? Is that what the law is about? I'll tell you what, it's a great conversation for the church nowadays. What is the law really about? Is it to wield and knock each other out with and make sure you know that I obey the law better than you do? Is that what it's about? I go to church and I do this better than you. Is that what it's about? Or is it a matter of, it's a guideline for us to understand how to live our relationships? We can't do it, but it's a nice guideline, so we're led to Jesus, who's able to empower us and help us to understand, you know what? Like Paul said, the whole law is achieved in this one thing. Love your neighbor. Just love the people around you. I've been so encouraged by your dad at times when he said, I had all this stuff going on in my head and all these blah, 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 and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. But that's the one thing that Jesus came to reveal, was the love of God for us, to impart it to us, and to be able to live it among each other. I think I got that. I might have trouble doing it, but I got it. So we're going to John 8. I said last week that there are 3 places where Jesus refers to being lifted up. That's his kind of terminology. When he talks about the cross, it's about being lifted up, and it's in John 8. And portions of John 8 will be very familiar to you. If you're a John freak, like I tend to be, then maybe the whole chapter is familiar to you. But most likely, the opening part of John 8, where Jesus is teaching in the temple, and they bring a woman to him who was caught in adultery. That's what it says in the text. And their intentions for this woman and for Jesus are not good, the Pharisees and religious leaders. And we've got that whole story that opens up the chapter in verses 2 through 11. And the way Jesus deals with it, we know about him writing in the earth and all that. We won't go through the whole story. But at the end of the story, when he says to the woman, so where are your accusers? Where are those people that were accusing you? Where are those people that dragged you before me? And she says, there's no one. Now that's our testimony, by the way. If I've forgiven you and I've cleansed you from all unrighteousness, who is going to put anything back on you? And she says, there's no one. And he said, exactly. said, neither do I condemn you. So right away we get that word condemn again. I have not come into the world. See, one of the neatest things I think about Jesus is he's not just got a big mouth. He actually does what he talks about. You know what I mean? With Jesus, you can never say talk is cheap. Because if he taught it, if he said things like, I didn't come into the world to condemn you, when he has the opportunity to condemn this woman, he says, neither do I condemn you. Gee, I wish you could read the transcript of John 3. I had a conversation with Nick about this. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to condemn you. I wish you could get this message. I'm here to reveal love to you, what true love really looks like. That we just don't love the people that love us. That we love the people that don't love us, quite frankly. That's the nature of God. While we were yet sinners, it's this kind of a thing. Jesus is just, he's living this thing out. He says, neither do I condemn you. He doesn't condone what she did. He says, now go your way and give the sin thing a break. It's wrecking your life. And this is kind of like the storyline. And then we get to verse 12, which is where we're beginning today in verse 12. Basically, Jesus turns and starts resuming his teaching now. And just verse 12. Danielle, would you read John 8, verse 12?
Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life.
So we have to keep that in context. This thing just took place with this woman, and he's told her to go her way and sin no more. And now he turns back to the people he was teaching. Talk about having a working example. It doesn't say what he was teaching, but he turns back to them, and he says, I'm the light of the world. He's just told the woman to go. But he's filled her with his light so she can actually go and walk in the light as he is in the light. And that's what he said to her, I'm the light of the world. And he's calling them to follow him as the light of the world. It's like I said a minute ago, he just doesn't teach. We don't know what he was teaching, but we know this thing happened with the woman. And he actually acted out what he taught, basically. And then he says to them, everybody turns back to them, you can do that too. Isn't that a great word? I think. Instead of sitting there and going, wow, look at Jesus. He says, yeah, I am the light of the world. Do you remember in Matthew 5, I said, you are the light of the world? We are the light of the world. Follow me. Don't walk in the darkness. Follow me. This is tremendously enabling and empowering. Because basically what he's saying is, I've just shown you the way. I've just shown it to you. So the first thing we're looking at as we're working towards the cross here, I've just shown you the way.